So we're back again with the next part of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into File, and we're going to export this out appropriately. So let's go to Export All. Now, it is all, but one thing I should say is actually just go to Object Mode. I don't want to accidentally export any individual panels of that object. So we'll go to File, Export All. I like to go into the menu at the side so I can pick my settings. For this, I'm going to work with an Object Export, OBJ. You could work with FBX. I'm going to stick with OBJ for now, so we'll do that. Can leave everything set to there. You shouldn't need to tweak any of those. We'll go to Export All. You export it to the folder that's appropriate to you. For me, I'm going to add it into the folder for this tutorial, so adding detail via mapping, and I'm going to call this base pot, and I like to stick on the end of that OBJ. Just it's very obvious to me which file I'm looking at. It will have the OBJ extension. But I like to stick it on there. So base pot OBJ and export all. Okay, so that's going to have exported down. It's a quick test. We'll just go to import and we'll check that it is there. It is, look. Add in detail. We've got our Maya file, we've got a material file, and also an MTL file and an object file. So the Maya file is the file that you would have started off with. So that was already sat there. The object file is the current export file. So that's good. So it's sat there. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is minimize Maya and go over into ZBrush, which is where we're going to sculpt in some detail. So let's do that now. Alright, okay, so this is my default ZBrush view. I'm just going to go to import. I've got all sorts of ZBrush stuff on here, but what we want is, for me, is on the desktop. So in there, I'm going to go to 3D modeling, and there we are. There's our OBJ file. So go and locate that in your folder. Got that, and that's going to drop that in there, as you can see. Very low resolution, only 391 points on there, but everything's there that we need. We know that when we modeled that, or rather I modeled that and gave it to you, and then you know that you got UV unwrap on there and everything. But remember, when we're working in ZBrush, we can work across different subdivision levels, and that's ultimately what we're going to do, because we're going to up the resolution of this by subdividing it, and we're also then going to start to sculpt in some surface detail. But ultimately, the idea is that we'll be able to extract back out that surface detail, the high resolution surface detail, and apply it back onto our very low resolution model. So it's actually a pretty economical, efficient way of working. Okay, so let's have a look at our system and how we're going to do this. So let's go into geometry. And in geometry, we're going to subdivide the model. We'll do it once. You'll see suddenly we've got up to 1600 faces. Subdivide again, a couple more times, so we're pretty nice and smooth. So 102,000. I'm going to go a bit more because I'm greedy at these things. So we've got actually a pretty high resolution model there that we're working with, which is pretty good. So that means that when we do start to sculpt on it, we'll get some pretty neat surface detail. But already you can see there's a little bit of faceting going on there. So again, we're probably going to want to subdivide that further. So let's keep our eye on this number here as we subdivide again. So we're up to 1.6 million now. That should allow us plenty of surface to play around with. But don't worry, when we drop this back into Maya, we are not going to be dropping in the 1.6 million poly version. We're going to be dropping in 300 and some poly version. But what we are going to do is sculpt in a lot of high res detail onto this asset here. Now, of course, you could use polypaint to physically paint the model. You know, you could paint to look like pottery or stone, or shiny porcelain, or that kind of thing. What I'm really interested in is just getting the surface detail on there. That is kind of recesses and scratches and bumps and knocks and those kind of things. I'm not so concerned about the poly painting stuff. For now, that's a different thing altogether, something I'm sure you've already covered. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll have a look at some of our brushes that we can work with. Okay, so I don't mind the normal kind of standard brush. It's decent, but it's not the best. But there are some pretty neat ones in here. One that everybody seems to love is the damn standard brush, so we'll definitely use that one. We'll add that in there, and then we'll also have a look and see if there's any other little brushes in there that we can start to work towards. So any ones that are going to offer us maybe little creases or knocks or bumps or those kind of things, and then we'll take it from there. So let's have a little look through. I don't think there are any in there right now that we'll work with. I don't think we want to drop any machine parts in there, and certainly dragon bones. I don't think we'll have any of those, although you could have a play if you wanted. I think what we'll do is we'll keep it simple, and we'll stick with the damn standard just to get the idea down, and then we'll start to play around perhaps with a few alpha brushes and see if we can add anything there as well. So as I'm sure you're aware by now, you've got a brush system here. So we're going to start off in Z sub, which means it will sculpt into the surface and not pull out of the surface. We've got our focal shift, draw size and intensity. I can of course get those by holding down space on my keyboard. So I'm going to reduce my Z intensity to just early teens, something like that. That brush size, not too big also. And let's have a look at some of the things we might like to do. How about if we just had some little sort of cracks or something forming in here? So we're starting to get just a few little blemishes which are starting to fall in there. So again, simple stuff perhaps. I don't want to do too much on the edges because that's probably not going to work too well in terms of the output that I'm looking for. But I could start to do that kind of thing. So maybe we've got some sort of crack which has appeared in there again. As much or as little as that as you like. If you wanted to sculpt in surface detail which, let's say, wasn't damage or knocks or chips or anything like that, but was actually maybe was within the firing of the pot or something like that when it had been made, you could have a look at adding some symmetry to it. Of course, we know if we press X on the keyboard will give us symmetry. So we could do that kind of thing. So we could very quickly sort of sculpt in some surface relief, that kind of thing. But what about also if we went to something like transform, which is where we access our symmetry mode here, and we looked beyond just the basic symmetry, and something that maybe radial symmetry. So that radial symmetry is interesting, but it's not really the right axis that's falling in. So let's move in here. We'll turn X off, go into Y. That's better. So we could actually start to sculpt in something which uses radial symmetry. Something like that's pretty neat. We could work with something like that as a pot, couldn't we? Or even, if I'll just undo that, how about if we just went a little bit harder with our intensity, and then we tried to draw some nice straight lines down. Now, you might think, well, they weren't straight lines, were they? And of course they weren't. But what we can do is we can use a couple of shortcuts on our keyboard to help us do that. So what I tend to do is I like to kind of square off my view. So I'm going to use Shift to do that. As I'm moving around, Shift will snap to that. And you can start to drag downwards, but as you start to drag, almost like 1 pixel down, hold down the Shift key, and it just snaps to a straight line. Something like that. That's pretty neat. So we'll do that again. I'll just undo with Control Z. This time I'm going to go into Transform, and the radial count I'm just going to up a little bit. 24 is pretty good. That's a nice sort of roundish number. And I'm going to do the same thing again here. We'll start to move down, but hold down Shift. We could achieve that kind of thing. So again, we're just sculpting in detail. It doesn't have to be chips and bumps and knocks and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely not. But let's continue on. So we've got those kind of details in there. So what about if we had something like, I quite like using inflate for this. So I'm going to just go to I, and then of course it in flat for some reason, but it's inflate. I don't want my symmetry on anymore at all, so I'll just have to deactivate symmetry. And then let's have a look at some of our alphas that we've got in here. Now, I would definitely advise that you do a search for some of your own alphas, or indeed take your own photographs and convert those into suitable alphas. But right now, I've seen lots of stuff online where people are selling cheap alpha packs for skin textures and all that kind of stuff. They're not massively expensive. I'm not saying you have to go and invest in them. You can make them relatively easily yourself, but they're very, very well worth having. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to use somebody else's. I'm just going to nip in here. Let's find something that looks, it's kind of a scratch sort of thing. I'm just going to have a look, see what sort of surface detail we could get with any of these. That's not a bad one. So we'll use that. Now, the way that these work is that rather than you having a normal brush, you get an alpha, which just acts as your brush. So that's pretty neat. But if we want to do that, and then instead of having an additive, we have subtractive, so we can either change the subtractive there. Or we can hold down Alt on our keyboard as we do it. You can see you suddenly get this little blemish in there. Now I like inflate because it tends to, you know, allow you to kind of sculpt a little bit more with it like that, and it actually kind of puffs out the surface a little bit like inflate sort of would. So you could, again, you could work with those kind of things. Of course, if you find that that's not enough intensity, you could go in and really gouge a piece out, or you can massively reduce your intensity and then really just doing quite subtle. That's up to you. Now the other thing, of course, is that because we're working on a stroke here, which is, like what we say, is in dots, which effectively lets you pull things along in this way, it will give us just a very linear sort of approach. Now, the other thing, of course, we can do is drag. The drag one is really neat because what that allows you to do is click and drag in some sort of surface and orientate it. Again, that's a little bit low on the intensity. I'll come up to kind of the middle of the teens. You can drag that. Obviously, the higher you go, the less resolution you're going to get, both in terms of your model and also in terms of the quality of the actual alpha. Because that's not hugely sharp, that alpha. But that can be pretty neat to get that. So again, I'm going to go to Alt this time. I'm going to start to just pull something out, which is going to give me a little bit more sort of surface relief on this kind of thing. So again, I get that kind of thing. Okay. And we could do that. You could do that with multiple alphas. You could try other things. You know, if you've got, I don't know, maybe this is slightly pitted where it's been fired. It's just there's been an error on something on the fire. You get these weird pits in there, so we could have that kind of thing. We could just reduce the intensity a little bit. Reduce the focal shift as well might help. We can start to kind of pull in all sorts of these little anomalies. Again, I think just up the intensity just a little bit so we get a little bit more of that kind of thing. You know, sometimes a little error in the fire into the pot, or it's, you know, over time it's kind of weathered and worn away or something. But, you know, there's any number of things you could do to this. I don't want to tell you what to do. You've got to decide what you want to do with that. But my advice would be experiment with the different types of brushes and see what they do in terms of sculpting. Definitely have a go with the symmetry, because it does let you put in kind of very geometric, you know, well-ordered patterns and things. And do play around with the difference in kind of sprays, freehand, particularly that drag one. It's really neat for dragging in alphas. Other than that, I am only going to do one more thing, and that is I'm going to go back to, I think, freehand, just a very basic sort of flat type alpha. I'd like to go back into my symmetry again. It's probably a little bit intense, that symmetry actually, but what we'll do is we'll come back down, relatively low intensity. I'm going to go back to my damn standard, and I just like the idea of having something a little bit more ornate, so I'm going to kind of line it up with this. I'm going to hold down Alt so it kind of it pulls out of the surface. And just put some pattern across the top, something of that sort. So it's a pretty interesting sort of looking pot. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there as regards the sculpting in ZBrush. And in the next video sequence, I'll show you how you can start to export some of these things out to use them in Maya.